All right. So greenhouse gas emissions avoidance and reduction is obviously the most effective pathway to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit global average temperatures to about 1.5 degrees C. Now, some argue that Africa's contribution to greenhouse gas emission is very low, about 5.6%. And so there's no priority to decarbonization. But the continent is also determined to industrialize. We want to add value to gold, diamonds, cocoa, and all the raw materials that we are known to produce in large quantities. Again, we have about 600 million people who need access to energy. And so to meet these needs, we might have to rely on fossil fuels, which produce or provide a cheap source of energy. And if we do that, we are going to produce greenhouse gases in very large quantities, especially point source emissions. And so because of that, we need to have control over our emissions, or at least find a way to develop sustainably so that it doesn't take us by surprise. We don't need to wait until our emissions are about maybe 20% of the global emission before we take steps to decarbonize. So waiting until emissions spiral out of control before adopting decarbonization strategies is not a very good option, right? So it is crucial for us to embed decarbonization into our development agenda, even if there's not so much pressure on us to decarbonize. Now, Ghana's energy transition framework reflects this urgency. Okay? The country has pledged its nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement, aiming to attain net zero by 2060. However, there's a key question that usually I like to ask on platforms like this. How would Ghana know when it has achieved net zero emissions or carbon neutrality? Achieving any goal requires a clear sense of direction. For example, if you are traveling from Kumasi to Accra, three things are essential. First, you need to know your starting point. You need to be able to track your location throughout the journey. And also, you need to be able to recognize when you've reached your destination, in this case, Accra. So similarly, you cannot manage what you don't measure, as they usually say. So decarbonization is not just implementing green solutions such as renewables and afforestation. It is mostly about data. So effective decarbonization will hinge on robust emission assessment and implementation solutions, and implementing solutions based on real world or real-time data. Now, Ghana has a very large informal sector, and we have a complex socio-cultural dynamics, which makes it quite difficult for us to control or measure our emissions accurately. So this raises a critical question. Can higher education institutions in Africa, our universities and other higher education institutions, can they lead the charge by developing a data-driven decarbonization solution on their campuses that can be scaled nationwide? Okay. Universities have a pivotal role to play in this effort because, first of all, universities are heavy emitters due to their large population, diverse activities, and multiple stakeholders. Secondly, university campuses can serve as ideal models for testing and developing solutions that can be extended into our broader society. And then lastly, as thought leaders, universities are generally seen as good examples, right? So if we take the first step, society is going to emulate from us. Okay? However, to be effective, our higher education institutions must also have control over their carbon footprint, right? We can't advise people on how to decarbonize if we are not taking steps to do that. So back here in KNUST, at the Brew-Hammond Energy Centre, the Net Zero Carbon Emission Lab, the climate compatible growth program, we are working together to conduct a baseline assessment of KNUST's carbon footprint. And we believe that if this is done effectively, it will provide some example for other institutions in the country to follow suit. Now, in January this year, Prof. Kwanzaa and I visited TU Delft, and we were truly inspired by the work that they are doing over there in terms of how they've turned the whole campus into a green environment that inspires the nation to follow suit. So today we are privileged to have a speaker from the team behind TU Delft's Green Campus Initiative to share their invaluable experiences and insights with us. Dr. Nika Head is a postdoc at TU Delft Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management. She holds a double bachelor's degree in international business and languages from the Netherlands and France, and a master's degree in international management from TU Dresden in Germany, specializing in environmental and sustainability management. She earned her PhD at TU Delft, focusing on the role of higher education institutions in the energy transition, particularly investigating campus living labs and climate neutrality. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed journals on topics including university carbon footprints, campus living labs, and sustainable co-creation and innovation in higher education contexts. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on the theme, Can Campus Living Labs Pave the Way to Climate Neutrality? The TU Delft case. We will begin with a brief remarks from the director of the Brew-Hammond Energy Centre, who are the host of this program, Professor David Atokwansa. This will be followed by an insightful presentation from our distinguished speaker, Dr. Het. After the presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion. You are encouraged to share your questions in the chat window or use the raise hand feature when the Q&A session begins. We invite you to stay engaged throughout the session, and we are hopeful and we believe strongly that it will be worth the time that you will spend with us today. So without much ado, I'm going to invite Prof. David Atokwansa to give us a brief remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Yen. I am still in transit. My connection is not very strong. So with your permission, having shown my face, I would turn off the video to save some bandwidth.
Permission granted, Prof.
Thank you. So, yeah, let me start by giving a little background, saying a little bit about the center, the Brew-Hammond Energy Centre. This was established by the university, so we are an integral part of the university system about 15 years ago, with the mandate to harness and deploy the vast research capabilities and skills within the university to address the increasingly complex challenges that confront Ghana in the area of energy and sustainability, and in fact, the continent at large. So we are hosted at the College of Engineering, but we work across the entire university. We have over 110 world-class experts who bring their skills to the things that we do. We bring together competencies ranging from engineering, law, economics, architecture, forestry, physics, environmental science, and environmental and climate science, sociology, political science, accounting, etc. So with this broad range of expertise, we conduct training, we conduct research, and provide consultancy and advisory services to a broad range of clients. Currently, we cluster around 7 research teams. We have the solar energy group, we have the bioenergy and biofuels, we have the wind and hydro group, energy efficiency and demand side management. We have the green hydrogen group, electric vehicles and sustainable mobility, and the energy and system modeling group. So we are glad to have worked over the past 15 years with various partners within Ghana, across the continent, and in fact around the world. So we are glad to be working with TU Delft now. So on the continent, we've worked with the African Union in shaping continental strategy on RE-based electrification using solar PV and wind. We've worked with ECOWAS through the specialized agency called the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, ECRI. We work with them on a harmonized regional approach to solar energy utilization through initiatives such as the ECOWAS Solar Energy Initiative. This established a framework for ongoing capacity development activities. We've worked in shaping the renewable energy law, the landscape that makes the uptake of renewable energy possible. We worked on the energy transition, and some of our partners over the years have included IRENA, ECRI, of course, the African Union through AFREC. We work with NORAD, the World Bank and Cities Alliance, DANIDA, and many more. We are currently very happy to be working with the Climate Compatible Growth Initiative as well. So today we, as part of our public engagement and knowledge dissemination activities, we host this special session focusing on universities as living labs. And the aim is to bring some light and perspectives to this important subject. And to do this, we have an outstanding speaker who has already been introduced to you. Before I finally hand back to moderator, let me acknowledge our partners, of course, the Climate Compatible Growth Initiative, that is very competently handled by the network locally is handled by Professor Kemalso, Professor Joseph Akowa, and Dr. Kwesi Edupoku. Of course, the Net Zero Carbon Emissions Lab, led by our own Dr. Yen Sokamanuyam, and the TU Delft Global Initiative, Claire, Bass, and Herbert. We are grateful. Special thanks also to our seminars and workshops committee, chaired by Dr. Kilson. We have Dr. Sefako and Dr. Sebastian Palu. We are grateful for all the work you've done behind the scenes to make today possible. And of course, our media and comms team, led by Dr. Jonathan Quay. So on this note, I welcome you all, and I hand back to you, moderator, Dr. Yen.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the elaborate remarks. I think now is the time we've all been waiting for. Anika, you have the floor, and audience, Anika.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply honored to be here with you. And I also had the pleasure to meet Professor Kwanzaa and Dr. Yen in person when they were visiting TU Delft, and it was a truly inspiring encounter. And I'm very impressed what you did already, which matches a lot with what I did here. So I think it's a great opportunity to share what I've learned here, and then also learn from you what you did there. I'm gonna share my screen. Hope this goes well. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Yes. You see it also in, I have two screens, so you see it in full picture and not with the speaker notes, which appear on the other screen as well. Do you just see the slide, the cover slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let me start with a talk, and I'm gonna try to keep it short because there is a lot of value I find in exchanging knowledge and seeing what you learned, and well, hearing what I learned here. And I'm gonna start with two quotes from the research I've done. The first one is, living labs will help to facilitate a vibrant research campus where numerous stakeholders are involved in getting real results. Well, that sounds amazing and great. Let's hear the next one. There is a lot of confusion, I must say, different types of understanding of what we're doing in the Living Lab until today. And this was when the Living Lab I researched on campus was actually finished already. So you get the picture that there is a little bit of friction, a glittery side on the outside, but if you dig deeper, it might get a bit fuzzy. But before I begin, let me repeat myself that I really believe that we can learn from each other. So I'm going to talk for a bit, but I'm also really much looking forward to discussing with you. And I hope there is a satisfying and engaged discussion at the end. And my aim for today is that after this talk, you have a feeling about what living labs might be, and you know that in order to talk about living labs, you need to create a shared understanding with the one you're talking to. You can reflect with me on the role of universities and the role of universities in the sustainability transition. And distinguish between the two concepts, the living labs on campus and the campus as a living lab. And hopefully you engage and share your perspectives and experiences so we can learn from each other in the end. I was nicely introduced about my work, but it's always hard to engage with an audience that is fully online. So I thought, let me introduce myself, just the person who I am. And who I am is a quite fundamental question, but let me explain what I do in my free time and what I enjoy doing. I've been doing trampolining for the biggest part of my life competitively. And I stopped doing that, but I still like hanging upside down. I love hammocks in any way. And I think there is a lot of value in hanging upside down, actually. Well, listen to your doctor if this is for you, but just to see the world from a different perspective. And I think this is also a valuable skill for any researcher. You can also do this lying somewhere where you wouldn't be lying, and all of a sudden you see the world and differently, and you see things, you discover different things. And I think this is valuable in doing research as well, especially when we're dealing with complex problems that can be viewed from different angles. And I've been growing up in the south of Germany in the Black Forest. I'm in the Netherlands now and I miss the hills a bit. But yeah, so this is my background. And I skipped this one, who am I at work, because I've been nicely introduced already. So I did my PhD on sustainability transformation of higher education institutions, the climate neutral campus, and the campus as a living lab, which I will be sharing today. So can campus living labs pave the way to climate neutrality? First of all, what is a living lab? And I'd like to do a little experiment with you. If you could scan the QR code, or I don't know if you can copy the link, you're going to come to a whiteboard where you can just type in what you think a living lab is. And just to be completely clear, there is no right or wrong answer. It's just about what do you think it is, to see what other things think also. So I'm gonna keep the QR code on for a while so you can scan it. And then I'm gonna switch to the Padlet where you should see answers from your peers. See people joining, that's great. The first ones are coming in, perfect. Thank you for joining the discussion. I might wait for another minute. People can drop their answers. So some people said that it's a facility where ideas can be continuously worked on. It's an organic environment for experiments, a place where continual experimentation and data gathering and analysis is done. It's a great tool to optimize processes and structures for a more sustainable future and experimentation and innovation space. I see more people writing, probably. I'm going to refresh the page. A real world research environment that uses collaboration to test and develop new products and technologies. The purpose of this exercise was to show you that there was no one gave the exact same answer. And there is a lot of fuzziness around the concept of living labs. You might have been experiencing that now, writing or reading through the answers. And this is exactly what I felt when I was starting out researching campus living labs. The more I asked and dug deeper into what is it that is a living lab, and I talked to people, the more I had the impression that I cannot get to the core and to the gist of it. So even though everybody is super impressed and is, well, how to say, is emphasizing the potential that living labs have or might have, if you dig into the core of them, it gets a little fuzzy. And also the literature isn't really helping. So there is no single definition of a living lab. There exist thousands of definitions, no, actually, but several hundred definitions of living labs. They're described as promising innovation contexts, but also as environments, as methodologies, as innovation management tools. So it's really hard to grasp what a living lab really is. And it's nicely shown in a quote from one of the studies I did. It's a long one, but I think it's the gist of things. Living labs is actually difficult to understand. Not everyone understands the iterative nature of a living lab setup. It's confusing and repetitive at the same time. Not a good combination. So if someone doesn't have a good understanding of why we're doing this and what is the structure of this, it just seems unstructured to most people. And that's it. It's an iterative participatory project which has outcomes that you didn't necessarily aim at or plan. So it's difficult to communicate to people what it is the benefit here, and how do you use it, because it stretches over a long time. So I went and I figured that to understand what a living lab is, it's more easy to start and tell people what a living lab is not. So a living lab is not just one researcher in a lab trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. It's not just testing technology in a real world environment or collecting data in a real world environment. And it's not just set in a highly controlled environment, like a normal laboratory setting that you would think of, like we see here in the later picture. Is this, oh, that's not what I wanted. And what is a living lab then? To describe living labs, I used 5 characteristics, and we can later discuss characteristics you would add or which ones you would delete. but I define them, they have to be in a real world environment as opposed to the controlled lab environment. People, private, and public, on the public, private, people partnerships have to be engaged, and that includes universities, governmental entities, companies, and the end user, and they co-create together in transdisciplinary approaches. Transdisciplinary approach means just we're including all kinds of knowledge, not only academic knowledge, but also practitioners' knowledge. And it's done for sustainable aims. We innovate and we co-create to sustainable goals and to solve a complex. Is the campus an IRC campus? Sorry, I can't read these presentations off. Well, as Dr. already solutions that contribute sustainable development goals. Like many other universities worldwide, therefore TU Delft aims to use the campus as a living lab, as well as to realize a carbon neutral, biodiverse and circular campus with a reduced footprint with a greatly improved quality of life and use. Well, those aims are noble, great, and much needed, and they're clear. But the question is where to begin. You might think that in a university environment, it's probably one of the best places to know where we're at. But when I started my research, we didn't know the full extent of our carbon footprint. That also means we didn't know how much work it would be to reach climate neutrality. We didn't know why we don't see more living labs on campus. So we didn't know which challenges they face and why we don't see more. And we didn't know how we could enable and support those living labs that we have so that it could actually function well and deliver what they're set up for. And we didn't have any guidelines to set up the campus as a living lab to comprehensively use the innovation potential that these living labs have. So these questions, all in all, bring me to my overarching question, which was, how can campus living labs contribute to climate neutrality? And first, I established the status quo on our own campus, so the campus of TU Delft, and I established the carbon footprint and the challenges the campus living labs face. And then I ventured out and extended the scope to include other universities as well, to answer the questions, what enables campus living labs to function well, and what is the campus as a living lab? And I'm going to briefly walk you through the results of my studies, and I'm happy to share more background information in the discussion part. So what I learned is that if we were to compensate the carbon footprint of our university, we would have to plant a lot of forest. So what you see here is each of the colored square is 9 hectares of forest. And it sums up to a total of roughly 9,000 hectares. The light gray area here is the campus, the TU Delft campus. The darker gray outline is the border of the municipality of Delft. So we would have to plant a lot more forest than actually the space that we have here. What I also learned is that the carbon footprint in total was 106,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. And more than 80% of those emissions were scope 3 emissions. That means indirect emissions that from the supply chain that are not directly owned by the university itself. You might think of everything the university buys, from furniture to construction materials for new buildings, how people come to campus, how do they commute, with which modes, do they come by car or train or by bike? And the total result, I calculated this with a a lot of university data and collaborating with a lot of different entities that provided the data. And I want to draw your attention of the total carbon footprint to the biggest 5 emission sources. The biggest 4 of them, apart from natural gas, are Scope 3 emissions. And that means if we want to get to climate neutral, we need to include and work together with TU Delft suppliers and employees to achieve that goal. And if we look at them more closely, they all concern the campus. So what we see is there is a lot of potential to reduce our carbon footprint here.
Like she's standing to make the presentation.
By looking
like she's standing
at the campus. And this is where the Living Labs come in again, because we said Living Labs can be a great contributor to actually reach sustainable goals. So I looked at the opportunities and challenges of those Living Labs, and I looked at 6 cases on the TU Delft campus. And I'll map out 2 to just give you an example and a feeling of what I found here. One is the solar e-bike parking station. Oh, that was a bit quick. It was designed and built with students and faculty members from different faculties throughout the campus, but also with campus and real estate and corporate offices and designers. And it contains PV cells that deliver direct current to charge e-bikes parked directly at the structure. It's placed here on campus, and it's actually working and running, and there is still student project and research monitoring going on to monitor the yield and the usage of the structure. And a second example is right now, a geothermal well is being drilled on campus. It's a huge project. And the geothermal well will provide the campus, but also connected neighboring areas, residential areas with sustainable heat. And the share and stakeholder setup is quite unique because it includes TU Delft and researchers, but also energy companies. And it will serve as a research location, heat network, and it's a new business case. But coming back to the challenges that I researched, and I realized there are Living Lab internal challenges and external challenges that we face on campus. Internal challenges, they are different stakeholders have different motivations to be engaged in the Living Lab. There is questions of funding, not having the same vision, no monitoring in place, complex decision-making, getting used to new ways of working, opening up systems and infrastructure which might be vulnerable or which might be considered risky. You get the picture. And it would sound like this. I think we really had the idea that we understood everyone's motivation, and it was clear that we didn't. The external challenges the Living Labs faced were related to the environment on campus, but also to the university organization. And it was quite difficult for these campus Living Labs to be set in a quite traditional, complex and layered university organization with a missing mandate and guidelines. Resource allocation was not clear. There was a lack of coordination, structure, and organizational support. Decision-making processes within the university were really complex. And it just seemed like the Living Labs on campus were overall just not really fitting the university organization and how the university normally operates. And it would sound like this. When I had to integrate the Living Lab, I thought that it would just cost an extra year. I wasn't very happy with it at first. Our real estate development needed to continue, and I had to make sure that the Living Lab story wouldn't affect the planning of the project. So also timelines that wouldn't match. But how then to enable campus Living Labs so they can use their potential to innovate for a more sustainable future? I found 16 factors through a literature review that can enable campus living labs across several phases, at the starting phase, at the operation phase, and the transfer and scaling phase. Mind you that those phases look very linear right now, but I think you got a sense already that living labs can be quite fuzzy and chaotic. So living labs themselves might not know in kind of which phase they are, but I think it's an all right representation to say that there is a start, an operation, and an ending phase. And the results were still quite tentative. There is need for more living labs to see if this is fitting, but I think I can still share some tendencies. And what we found was that there is indeed different factors important in different phases. So in the initiation and getting started phase, leadership, for example, was quite important. Whereas in the operational phase, it was more about co-creation and collaboration and the most fitting methods to use. And then the scaling phase, the network around it. But if you would ask me 16, it's a lot, where to start? I'd like to draw your attention to some of the factors that were pertinent across all the phases. And those were the relevant stakeholders working together, having good internal management of the university and good co-creation and collaboration setup and structures, have a shared understanding of what you're doing, and have learning and evaluation processes in place. Otherwise, again, like with the CO2 footprint, you don't know where you're going and if you reached. One last point here is that you realize probably that the factors, the orange factors, they're very close to the core of what a living lab is. So we're actually, and that the surrounding organization can heavily support those factors and create the environment for living labs to thrive. So we're actually talking about a system that is needed to enable innovations and impacts the living labs to be able to flourish, which brings us to the last part, and that's the campus as a living lab. And up to here, we've been looking at single initiatives and how they can thrive and how they are challenged. But we also established that they need a better organizational embedding and better organizational coordination. So in my last study with Nina Vogel and Michael Bossert, we established that there are two different modes of universities to use living labs and to use their campuses. And one is living labs on campus. That's when you host single initiatives and living labs. They're still quite isolated and not really connected. And the second mode is the campus as a living lab, where the campus is understood as a fertile breeding ground for all kinds of innovations and test beds, initiatives. And they're connected and coordinated, and they can exchange knowledge and resources. And the campus is used as an arena for co-creation with all kinds of stakeholders. I'm going to skip this one. However, as you can imagine, the campus as a living lab requires a lot of commitment from the university itself, and it requires also significant changes in the way we work together, in the way we think, how we allocate our resources, and how we measure success. And while I would argue that a living lab in itself, a living lab initiative, shouldn't be the goal, because I see it more, at least in a campus context, as a means to an end, a way to get somewhere else. The campus as a living lab might be a goal in itself, because it would not stop. It would be running continuously. And you are creating a lively ecosystem with cross-fertilization and sharing data and research resources and learning. And it becomes a net of initiatives where you can then extrapolate and diffuse single initiatives or the whole setting to different areas. Yet again, Many universities worldwide are stuck with the same problem. That all sounds great, but where to start and how do we get there? And I'd say, well, let's start at the starting phases, preparation and start. And in our study, we try to help universities working towards a campus as a living lab, and we develop guidelines for universities worldwide. That includes the knowledge that I just shared you from the previous chapters to eliminate the challenges and to enable use the enabling factors that I just presented. And we put it together in a canvas where every block can be a starting, so there is no order. It can be a starting point, and it's connected to a huge list of questions that universities worldwide can use to actually adapt their campus as a living lab setup to their local context. So this is not to be understood as a one-size-fits-all solutions, because this is not possible, because every campus, every living lab, every campus as a living lab needs to be set up together with the local conditions and with the organizational conditions. So we tried to give question prompts so the universities themselves could work out their way, but we take them by their hand to actually set up these structures. And I'm excited to see how this tool will be used in practice in the future. And this is not the end design, but I'm believing that it will be adapted, complemented, adjusted when it's actually being used. And I'm also sure we missed some things, but this is all a co-creation altogether. This is how I see it. It's a good starting point to get started. So to sum it up, what does it all mean? It means that the recommendations I would give so that living labs can pave the way to climate neutrality play out on two different levels. The first one is the level of the living labs themselves. And the other one is the underlying level of the organizational, of the organization and the universities. So they can actually become, so that the living labs can actually become part of the organization, and instead of just being single and isolated initiatives. So to make it more concrete for the campus living labs themselves, I'd advise them to engage all relevant stakeholders from the beginning and not onboard them when the biggest part is done, and that is especially intended for including users and students, for example. Recognizing the unique nature of a living lab, it's not a project and it might be more fuzzy and chaotic in the beginning, and embrace possible frictions that come along with it. And for higher education institutions, it's to embed living labs organizationally, not to have them as foreign entities on the campus to just host them. Systematically set up the campus as a living lab and learn from other higher education institutions like we're doing now, because everybody is struggling with the same questions and there is no point in trying to figure it out all by ourselves. I think we can use our resources much more efficiently. So I think there are enough tools and knowledge to get started immediately, and learning from them and refining and bringing it back into the sharing space. So things will develop along the way. And with highlighting the urgency for climate change mitigation and co-creation for sustainable solutions, I'd like to close with the words of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change: the time to act is now. And what will you do next? I hope that by now you got a feeling of what living labs might be. You can reflect with me on the role of universities in sustainability transitions. You know the difference between living labs on campus and the campus as a living lab. And we're going to have a great discussion. So I have some discussion prompts, but I'm not sure if that's needed or if we just start the discussion openly. So I well, this is a question to you, Dr. Jan. You can take it over from here, and thank you so much for all your attention.
Thank you so much, Anika, for this insightful presentation. I'm very sure I'm not the only one who was enjoying this. I wish we had 2 hours to delve into the details, but this is all we've got, and I'm sure the audience will come in with their questions. But I would like to look at a few things that you've discussed. I think one of the challenges that particularly we have here is the low interest of example, especially the public sector in research. I think as a researcher, it's quite difficult when you conduct research, and especially you find you make very good findings, but the stakeholders would not want to use it. That becomes a bit discouraging, right? So I think as universities, having some living labs on campus to start with would have been a great way of inspiring the other stakeholders to want to try the solutions that we develop here. I think as a university, and especially as higher education institutions across Africa, many of these institutions play key roles in the development of their nations, not only by training the workforce of the country, such as, let's say, producing graduates, both undergraduates and postgraduates, but most institutions are also providing advisory services to government, industry, and other stakeholders. And so this is something that has been ongoing. But we've gotten to a point that I think the next step will be implementing some of these solutions on campus in the form of either living labs on campus to just start with, co-creating with stakeholders, including government, industry, and other partners that we work with. And I think that would have solved that problem. So that is the part that I have learned so much from. Now I'll turn over to our audience to see if they have any questions. We have just 10 minutes, so I don't want to delay their questions. Please, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat window, or you can raise your hand. All right, Jude, please kindly go ahead. Hello, Jude.
Hello, Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so my question is, she kind of listed, let's say, the components that makes up a living lab. So my question is, assuming one of these components was missing, does it make it not a living lab? Let's say the government was not interested right now. Or you know how our university is. Maybe we couldn't get the whole university to buy in, so we set it at the college level. So a section of the university. Is this still a living lab? Since some, I don't know, didn't take the whole university, and maybe one of the entities is not here. Or we need every single component to make it a living lab.
All right, Anika.
That's my question.
Would you want to respond?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I think the question is for all the components that we need. For example, you need all the stakeholders to be on board to co-create a living lab. So he's asking if some of these components are missing, is it still possible to create a living lab?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much for it. My perspective is, you know what, in the end, it's not so important if you can call this a living lab, as long as you do it and as long as you tackle those complex challenges with different stakeholders, that you need to include that view as well in order to deliver a solution that works. So if this is a living lab and it gets the stamp living lab because you tick the 5 boxes or not, I don't find that part so important. And when I research the living labs on campus, to be completely frank and honest, I don't think they would tick all the boxes perfectly well for a living lab, but they had the aim to work together and to co-create and to include everybody that needed to be there to be set in a real world environment. So just working with this sense of we need to do these things differently and we need to innovate and work together in a different way, I think that is reaching the goal already. I hope that's clear. This is at least my view. So the discussion of is this a living lab or not, I always found not too important as long as, we're going in the direction of innovating together and we're searching for sustainable solutions for the problems we face.
All right, thank you. I think there's a question in the chat window that I want to read. Then I'll come back to you, Dr. Kwesi. What are the biggest challenges in implementing campus living labs and how can we overcome them? Oh, I know one of the challenges related to our case is going to be the challenge in finding a common interest for all the stakeholders. I think if you have different stakeholders coming together and the interest is different, it's very difficult to get them working together towards the same goal. But Anika, kindly take over from there.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. You needed a common vision, and I think you can still manage. It's going to be much harder, but you can still manage different stakeholders with different goals as long as they share that common vision and they want to walk into the same direction. And what everybody gets out of it might be different, but you need to walk in that direction together. So if that's not, if there is no shared understanding or shared vision, it gets really hard for the living labs. And I think one of the biggest challenges, if we talk about campus living labs, was actually the university structure here, because we're still thinking in silos and this is my kingdom and don't interfere with it. Whereas when we set up living labs and we co-create and collaborate together, it needs this kind of mind shift, also organizationally. And I think the Energy Centre is a great interdisciplinary center already that could host those kind of living labs, because there the researchers come together already. So I'm really thrilled to hear about that research center. But to actually fit it in a organizational structure that is just not working that way yet might result in friction and challenges and barriers that you have to break through first, which is hindering actually putting the work and energy in the living lab and innovating and putting your energy there where you want to create results. So I think this is one of the bigger ones that I would point out. All
right. Thank you very much. Akwasi, please kindly go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Anika, for the wonderful presentation, and Dr. Yen for the opportunity to ask my question. So my question is, how can the outcomes of campus living labs contribute to the broader sustainable transitions in local communities or beyond the university campuses? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I just take it from here, or do you want to say something, Dr. Yen?
No, please kindly go ahead, because of the time.
Yeah, I think the campus is a great place to test something, to innovate something in a kind of protected environment, because you're still within the university and campus borders. So there might be a mindset of we're doing research here, we innovate something, sometimes things fail and that's okay. But if there comes a result and an innovation, actually the aim is to scale it up or to distribute it or to embed it organizationally somewhere. So I think it's actually a goal of the living labs to not come up with something and that's it, but to think further along. And if you come up with, for example, the e-bike charging station that I was just talking about with the electrical bikes, the aim was to actually distribute those parking stations across the city. Or we're having a project with green facades here. So we test them here, but it's not to stop here. It's actually to make it bigger and grow and actually implement it in in cities or in neighboring districts. And I think in that way, they can also heavily, if you scale things up, and I admit it's really hard to monitor that process, but it's there where they can actually make the biggest contribution to climate neutrality. I mean, one part is on campus itself and making the university climate neutral. But if you scale it, this is when they can actually make a much bigger contribution to climate neutrality or sustainable transitions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think you
Yes,
responded
thank
to the
you.
question well. Yeah. Okay. Please, can everyone turn their cameras on briefly for us to take a photo? We are bringing the program to a close, and we would kindly ask that you turn your camera on so that we take a group photo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Akwasi, is it okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much for joining in the group photo. All right. I think we've already exhausted our time for this meeting. I really wish we could take more questions, but unfortunately, we have less than a minute to go, and I don't want to exceed the time. So on behalf of the Brew-Hammond Energy Centre and the rest of our partners, I would like to thank you, Anika, for the insightful presentation and taking time to respond to the questions. I think this is just the beginning of campus as a living lab or living labs on campus. It is completely new to us. We do not have any living labs here yet. Neither is our campus yet a living lab. But we are ambitious people. We believe that we can start from somewhere, and we are glad to learn a bit from you. I'm sure that someday we will also have a story to share, and in turn, we could also teach something that you can learn from, because we have a very unique sociocultural environment. Unlike your campus, we have quite a lot of trees already, so we might not need to plant as many trees as you have. And so we have our unique challenges, but we also have some advantages. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have here is getting the stakeholders to have a shared interest that we can all rally behind. But we can always start from somewhere. Thank you so much. And also on behalf of the center, I thank all our audience for making time to join us for today's webinar. I think it has been a blessing to me, and I'm hopeful that it was such a great program for all of you. On this note, I wish you all the best, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and bye-bye for now.
Thank you.